Blood spattered across the wooden floor of the modest ranch house as Sophia Keller crumpled against the wall, her trembling hand reaching up to touch her split lip. The year was 1876 in the small town of Platteville, Colorado, and her life had become a living nightmare. 3 years. Edmund Keller roared, his face contorted with rage as he loomed over his wife. 3 years of marriage and not a single son to show for it. What good are you to me? His hand, calloused from working the land but now wielded as a weapon, drew back for another blow. Sophia flinched, raising her arms to shield herself. At 23, her once bright eyes had dulled with fear and resignation. The promise of love that had accompanied their wedding vows had dissolved into bitter disappointment and violence. "Please, Edmund," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The doctor said we need to be patient. It could happen any time." "Patient," he spat the word like poison. "My father had 4 sons by the time he was my age. 4, and here I am with nothing but a barren wife." The cruel words stung worse than his blows. Sophia wasn't barren, they'd conceived twice, but both pregnancies had ended in devastating miscarriages. The second had nearly taken her life just 3 months prior, leaving her bedridden for weeks. The town doctor had warned them to wait before trying again, but Edmund refused to listen. "I won't spend another winter watching the Thornton boys help their father while my land suffers from lack of hands," Edmund snarled. He grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet. "If you can't give me sons, what use are you?" Sophia stumbled, her honey blonde hair falling across her face, partially hiding the bruise blooming on her cheekbone. "I've been a good wife to you," she said, finding a rare moment of courage. "I keep your house, cook your meals, tend your garden." The back of his hand connected with her face before she could finish. "Don't you dare talk back to me. My mother warned me about you, said you were too educated, too willful. Should have listened." Sophia tasted blood. The schooling her father had insisted upon before his death had been both a blessing and a curse. It had given her the position as the town's assistant schoolteacher before her marriage, but Edmund had seen it as a threat from the beginning. Once they wed, he forbade her from continuing her work. "I'm going to town," Edmund announced, grabbing his hat from the hook by the door. "And when I return, I expect dinner on the table and a better attitude in my wife." The door slammed behind him, leaving Sophia alone in the oppressive silence of their home. Through the small window, she watched him mount his horse and gallop away toward Platteville, likely headed for the saloon where he'd drink away what little money they had left. With trembling fingers, she dabbed at her bleeding lip with her apron. This wasn't the first time Edmund had struck her, but his violence had escalated since the last miscarriage. Deep in her heart, Sophia knew it was only a matter of time before his rage might kill her. Moving with the cautious steps of someone familiar with pain, she filled a basin with water and carefully washed her face. The cool water soothed the throbbing in her cheek, though it could do nothing for the ache in her soul. As she gazed at her reflection in the small mirror above the washbasin, Sophia barely recognized the woman staring back at her, pale, frightened, a shadow of her former self. 3 years ago, she'd been Sophia Kennedy, the educated daughter of a respected rancher who died unexpectedly, leaving her alone in the world. Edmund Keller had seemed like salvation, then handsome, hardworking, with a decent parcel of land. He'd courted her with flowers and promises of a good life together. The change had come slowly after the wedding, then all at once after the first miscarriage. A sudden resolve hardened within her as she stared at her reflection. She couldn't continue this way. She wouldn't. With quick movements born of desperation, Sophia gathered what few personal belongings she could carry: a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the small leather-bound book of poetry her father had given her, and the meager savings she'd managed to hide from Edmund over the past year. It wasn't much, barely $15, but it might be enough to get her somewhere safe. Her hands shook as she wrote a brief note. Edmund, I cannot be what you want. May God forgive us both. Sophia, she placed it on the kitchen table, next to the dinner she would not be cooking. Then, with one last look around the home that had become her prison, Sophia slipped out the back door and headed toward the barn. Edmund had taken his stallion, but the old mare, Daisy, remained. The gentle horse had been her companion on many solitary rides when Edmund was away, perhaps the only friend she had left in the world. We need to go, girl, Sophia whispered, quickly saddling the mare. And we can't come back. The afternoon sun was descending toward the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains as Sophia rode away from the ranch, headed south rather than toward town. She had no clear destination in mind, only the desperate need to put as much distance as possible between herself and Edmund before he discovered her absence. The terrain gradually changed from the open grasslands around Platteville to more rugged country. Sophia knew she should find shelter before nightfall, but fear drove her onward. Every shadow, every sound made her heart race with terror that Edmund had somehow discovered her escape and was in pursuit. As twilight descended, the temperature dropped sharply, a reminder that autumn was giving way to winter in the Colorado Territory. Sophia shivered in her thin dress, wishing she'd thought to bring a heavier coat. Daisy plodded faithfully onward, though the mare was tiring after hours of steady travel. Just a little farther, Sophia encouraged, though she had no idea where they were headed. The mare's ears perked forward suddenly, and Sophia tensed, fearing the worst. Then she saw a thin trail of smoke rising from beyond a small ridge. A campfire. Indecision froze her in place. A fire meant people, and people could mean help or danger. Out here, alone and vulnerable, Sophia had no way of knowing if whoever had made that fire would be her salvation or her doom. But the biting cold and the growing darkness made the decision for her. With cautious movements, she guided Daisy toward the ridge, ready to flee at the first sign of trouble. As she crested the small hill, Sophia saw a solitary figure sitting beside a modest fire in a small clearing near a creek. A man in a worn leather vest and cowboy hat was tending to a coffee pot suspended over the flames. A dappled gray horse grazed nearby, saddled but unburdened. Sophia hesitated, her instincts warning her of the risks of approaching a stranger. But then Daisy neighed softly, and the man looked up, spotting her silhouetted against the darkening sky. For a moment, neither moved. Then the stranger rose slowly to his feet, keeping his hands visible. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "You look like you could use a warm fire." Something in his tone respectful, cautious, lacking Edmund's perpetual undercurrent of aggression, gave her courage. Sophia nudged Daisy forward, descending toward the campsite while maintaining enough distance to flee if necessary. As she drew closer, she could see the man more clearly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat, and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. A gun belt hung at his hip, but he made no move toward the weapon. "Name's Patrick Sullivan," he said, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Most folks call me Pat." "Sophia," she replied, deliberately omitting her surname. "Sophia K." She stopped herself, unwilling to use Edmund's name any longer. "Kennedy," she finished, reclaiming her maiden name in that moment. Patrick's eyes narrowed slightly as they took in her appearance, the bruise on her cheek, the split lip, the disheveled state of her clothing. His expression darkened, but he spoke gently. "You're welcome to share my fire, Miss Kennedy. I've got coffee brewing and some stew left that I'd be happy to share." Hunger gnawed at Sophia's stomach. She'd been too distraught to eat before fleeing, but caution held her back. "I don't want to impose." "No imposition," he assured her. "Been riding alone for 3 days. Conversation would be welcome." After a moment's hesitation, Sophia dismounted, wincing as her feet hit the ground and sent pain shooting through her bruised body. Patrick noticed but said nothing, instead moving to help with her horse. "She looks tired," he commented, running a practiced hand along Daisy's neck. "Been riding hard," Sophia nodded, watching carefully as he unsaddled the mare and led her to the creek for water. His movements were confident but gentle with the animal, which eased some of her concerns. "You can rest your horse here for the night," he offered, returning to the fire. "Not safe for either of you to be traveling these parts after dark." "Thank you," Sophia said softly, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. The warmth of the metal seeped into her cold fingers, providing momentary comfort. Patrick busied himself ladling some stew into a second tin plate, giving her space. When he handed it to her, he deliberately ensured their fingers didn't touch, maintaining a respectful distance that Sophia appreciated. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional snort from one of the horses. Sophia could feel his eyes on her occasionally, taking in her injuries, but he asked no questions. Finally, as she finished the simple but nourishing meal, she felt compelled to offer some explanation. "I'm heading south," she said, staring into the flames. "Looking for work, perhaps in Colorado Springs." Patrick nodded thoughtfully. Long journey for a woman alone. There was no accusation in his voice, just concern. Sophia lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. His eyes were a deep blue, clear and steady. "Sometimes being alone is safer than the alternative," she said quietly. Understanding passed across his features and something harder, anger but not directed at her. His jaw tightened as he glanced at her bruised face. "Husband?" he asked simply. Sophia hesitated, then nodded once. Patrick set his plate down deliberately. "Man who raises his hand to a woman isn't worthy of the name." He wanted sons, she found herself explaining, though she owed this stranger no explanations. "We've been married 3 years and I haven't been able to give him what he wanted." "So he beat you for not bearing sons?" Patrick's voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. His next words were spoken with such quiet conviction that they pierced straight to her heart. "Then he never deserved you." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes at the simple truth in his statement. She blinked them away, unwilling to show more weakness. "Where are you headed?" she asked, changing the subject. "Denver, eventually," Patrick replied, allowing her the dignity of the diversion. "Got some business to attend to there. Before that, I'll be stopping in Boulder to deliver some papers." He added more wood to the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward into the night sky. "I could escort you as far as Colorado Springs if you'd like. These trails aren't safe for lone travelers." Sophia considered his offer. She'd planned to avoid towns where Edmund might search for her, taking back roads and hoping to reach Colorado Springs undetected. Having a companion, especially one who looked capable of handling trouble, would certainly be safer. But could she trust this stranger? As if reading her thoughts, Patrick said, "You don't know me from Adam, so I understand if you're wary. But I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm in my company." He gestured to the stars above them. "You can have my bedroll. I'll sleep on the other side of the fire and we'll head out at first light if that suits you." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. After a moment's deliberation, Sophia nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I accept your offer." "Pat," he corrected with a slight smile. If we're going to be traveling together, might as well use my given name. Pat, she agreed, returning his smile faintly despite her split lip. As they settled in for the night, Sophia wrapped in Patrick's surprisingly clean bedroll while he made do with his saddle as a pillow. She felt safer than she had in months. The man across the fire was a stranger, yes, but somehow she sensed he was exactly what he appeared to be: honorable, straightforward, and trustworthy. For the first time since fleeing her home, Sophia allowed herself to think beyond mere escape. Perhaps there truly was hope for a different life, one without fear and pain. With that comforting thought, she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd known in years, the steady presence of Patrick Sullivan keeping watch through the Colorado night. Dawn broke clear and cold over the campsite. Sophia awoke to the aroma of coffee and the quiet sounds of Patrick tending the morning fire. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, her body tensing with the instinctive fear that had become her constant companion. Then memory returned her escape, the chance encounter with the cowboy, his offer of protection. "Morning," Patrick greeted, noticing she was awake. "Hope you slept well." Sophia sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her body. The bruises Edmund had given her had darkened overnight, her ribs protesting every movement. "Better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the coffee he offered. While they shared a simple breakfast of hardtack and jerky, Patrick outlined their route. "We'll follow Beaver Creek south for about 10 miles, then cut eastward through Walker Pass. Rough country, but it'll keep us away from the main trails where," he hesitated. "Where Edmund might look for me," Sophia finished quietly. Patrick nodded. "If your husband comes searching, he'll likely check the stage stops and towns first. The pass will add a day to our journey, but it's safer." "You know this area well," Sophia observed. A shadow passed across Patrick's features. "Used to run cattle through here years back before the war." He didn't elaborate further, and Sophia didn't press. Everyone in the West carried their histories like private burdens. They broke camp efficiently, Patrick showing Sophia how to pack her belongings more securely for the journey ahead. His hands were large and weathered, but moved with surprising deftness as he adjusted Daisy's saddle to better distribute the weight. "She's a good mare," he commented, patting the horse's neck. "Older but steady. She'll get you where you need to go." As they mounted and began their journey south, Sophia found herself studying her traveling companion. Patrick rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. His dappled gray stallion, which he'd introduced as Merlin, moved beneath him like an extension of his own body. "How long have you had him?" Sophia asked, nodding toward the horse. 8 years, Patrick replied, a note of affection in his voice. "Got him as a half-wild 3-year-old nobody else could ride. He tried to kill me the first 3 times I mounted up." He patted the horse's neck fondly. "Now we understand each other." The morning passed pleasantly as they traversed the increasingly rugged terrain. Patrick proved to be knowledgeable about the land, pointing out edible plants and wildlife tracks. Occasionally, he would share anecdotes about his experiences in the territories, careful stories that revealed his character without divulging too much of his past. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest the horses. While Patrick refilled their canteens, Sophia gingerly touched her swollen cheek, wincing at the tenderness. "I have something that might help with that," Patrick said, noticing her discomfort. He rummaged in his saddlebag and produced a small tin. "Indian poultice. Learned about it from a Ute medicine man years back. Takes the sting out of bruises." Hesitantly, Sophia accepted the tin. Inside was a greenish paste that smelled of herbs and pine. "How do I?" "Just a thin layer," he explained, turning away to give her privacy as she applied the remedy. "Works on horses, too," he added with a slight smile. "Got kicked in the ribs by a Mustang last spring. This saved me weeks of misery." The poultice tingled against her skin, but soon began to dull the throbbing pain. "Thank you," she said softly. "It does help." Patrick merely nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with habitual vigilance. As they continued their journey, the landscape grew wilder, with pine forests giving way to rocky outcroppings. Patrick led them through hidden trails that Sophia would never have found on her own, occasionally dismounting to clear obstacles, or guide the horses through particularly difficult passages. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered to the west, promising an evening storm. Patrick frowned at the sky. "We should find shelter soon. Those clouds look mean." He guided them toward a stand of pines nestled against a rock face. "There's a hunter's cabin nearby if memory serves. Might not be much, but it'll keep the rain off." Sure enough, after another half-hour of careful navigation, they came upon a small, rough-hewn cabin tucked among the trees. It was weathered but appeared solid, with a stone chimney rising from one end. "Seems abandoned," Patrick said, dismounting and approaching cautiously, one hand near his holster. He peered through the single window, then tested the door. "Nobody's been here in months, I'd reckon." The interior was sparse, but dry, a single room with a small fireplace, a crude wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. Dust covered every surface, but there were no signs of animals having taken up residence. "Better than sleeping in the storm," Patrick declared, returning to help Sophia dismount. She tried to hide her grimace of pain as her feet touched the ground, but his observant eyes missed nothing. "Let's get you inside and resting. I'll see to the horses." The first raindrops began to fall as Patrick unsaddled their mounts and led them to a lean-to shelter attached to the side of the cabin. By the time he returned, carrying their saddlebags and his rifle, the rain had intensified to a steady downpour. Inside, Sophia had brushed the worst of the dust from the table and chairs and was attempting to light a fire with the meager supply of wood stacked beside the hearth. "Here, let me," Patrick offered, kneeling beside her. His fingers worked deftly, arranging kindling and striking a match. Within minutes, a small fire crackled in the fireplace, casting wavering light across the cabin's interior. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the rain beat a relentless tattoo against the cabin's roof. Patrick moved to the window, scanning the darkening forest beyond. "We'll wait out the storm here," he said, turning back to Sophia. "Should pass by morning." Sophia nodded, grateful for the shelter and his steady presence. As they shared the last of their provisions, jerky, hardtack, and dried apples, she found herself wanting to know more about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "You mentioned you were in the war," she said tentatively, unsure if it was a subject he preferred to avoid. "Many veterans did." Patrick's expression grew distant. "Union cavalry, enlisted in '62, served until Appomattox." He took a swig from his canteen. "Not much to tell that folks want to hear." "My father fought as well," Sophia offered. "Lost his right arm at Gettysburg. He never spoke of it either." Patrick studied her across the small fire. "Your father raised you well. Not every woman would have the courage to leave a bad situation, especially alone." "I'm not sure it was courage so much as desperation," Sophia admitted, staring into the flames. "Edmund, he was different when we married. Charming, even. My father had just died and I had few options as a single woman." "How did he change?" Patrick asked quietly. Sophia sighed. The memories painful but somehow easier to bear in the presence of someone who seemed to genuinely care. "Gradually, then suddenly. First it was small criticisms, then controlling what I wore, whom I spoke to. After my first miscarriage, he became cruel. After the second. Her hand unconsciously moved to her side where a particularly vicious kick had left ribs that still hadn't fully healed. Patrick's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. You mentioned you were a teacher before. Grateful for the slight change in subject, Sophia nodded. Assistant teacher in Platteville's schoolhouse. I loved it helping the children learn, watching them discover new ideas. A wistful smile touched her lips. Edmund forbade me from continuing after we married, said no wife of his would work outside the home. You miss it, Patrick observed. Every day, she confessed. I had hoped to eventually open a proper school of my own someday. In Platteville, many of the ranch children can't attend regularly because of the distance. That's a fine ambition, Patrick said, genuine admiration in his voice. Colorado Springs has several schools, I believe. Perhaps you'll find a position there. The thought kindled a small flame of hope within her. Perhaps I will. As the evening deepened and the storm raged outside, they continued talking, sharing selective pieces of their lives. Patrick spoke of his years driving cattle, of the changing West with its encroaching railroads and wire fences. Sophia told him about her childhood on her father's ranch, her love of books, her dreams for a different kind of life. What struck her most was how attentively Patrick listened, as if her thoughts and experiences truly mattered. It was so different from Edmund, who had never shown interest in her mind or her aspirations. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with Sophia, her eyelids growing heavy despite her interest in their conversation. You should rest, Patrick said, noticing her fatigue. Take the bedrolls, I'll keep watch. You need sleep too, Sophia protested. Patrick shrugged. Used to going without. Old army habit. He gestured to the chair near the door. I'll be comfortable enough. Too tired to argue further, Sophia arranged the bedrolls on the bare frame of the bed. As she settled in, pulling the blankets around her against the chill, she watched Patrick add more wood to the fire. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. He looked over at her, his expression difficult to read in the firelight. No need for thanks. Get some rest, Sophia. As she drifted toward sleep, lulled by the rain and the crackling fire, Sophia realized something startling for the first time in years. She felt not just safe, but seen. Patrick Sullivan, this stranger who had become her protector, saw her as a person of value, not merely a possession or a disappointment. It was a revelation that followed her into her dreams. The storm broke during the night, leaving a clear, washed sky by morning. Sophia awoke to find Patrick already outside, tending to the horses. The cabin seemed brighter in daylight, its rough simplicity almost welcoming after her fearful flight. Her body still ached, but the Indian poultice had indeed reduced the worst of the swelling. After splashing cold water on her face from the canteen, Sophia stepped outside to greet the day. Patrick was brushing down Merlin's dappled coat, speaking softly to the horse. He turned at the sound of her approach, his expression warming. "Morning," he greeted. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she replied honestly. The night's rest, free from fear of Edmund's fists, had done wonders for her spirit if not her bruises. The weather's improved. Should make for good traveling, Patrick agreed, finishing with Merlin and moving to check Daisy. His gentle handling of the mare reinforced Sophia's growing trust in him. If we make good time, we can reach Walker Pass by nightfall. They broke their fast with the last of their provisions, Patrick promising they could hunt along the way for their evening meal. As they saddled up and prepared to leave the cabin behind, Sophia found herself reluctant to depart. The simple shelter had provided a brief respite, a space where she'd begun to glimpse possibilities beyond mere survival. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they traveled, the trail narrowing as it wound higher into the foothills. Patrick rode slightly ahead, occasionally stopping to ensure Sophia and Daisy managed the difficult passages safely. His consideration touched her. Edmund had never shown such concern for her comfort or safety. Around midday, Patrick signaled a halt beside a small meadow where a spring bubbled up among rocks. While the horses grazed on the lush grass, he disappeared briefly into the surrounding woods, returning with a handful of wild onions and a rabbit he'd managed to snare. "Thought we might have a proper meal," he explained, efficiently skinning and cleaning his catch. "Traveling's easier with a full stomach." Sophia gathered sticks for a small fire, watching as Patrick prepared the rabbit with practiced ease. "You're very self-sufficient," she observed. He glanced up with a half-smile. "Necessity's a good teacher." "Spent more time in the wilderness than in towns these past years." "By choice?" she asked, curious about the life that had shaped this man. Patrick considered the question as he set the meat to cook. "Partly. After the war, found it hard to settle. Too many people, too many memories." He shrugged. "Out here, a man can breathe. Be judged by what he does, not where he's from or who his people were." There was something in his tone that suggested deeper wounds than he was revealing, but Sophia respected his privacy. Everyone had parts of themselves they preferred to keep hidden. She certainly did. As they ate the simple but satisfying meal, Sophia gathered her courage to ask the question that had been troubling her since they'd met. "Pat," she began hesitantly, "what will happen when we reach Colorado Springs?" He looked at her steadily. "That depends on what you want to happen. I mean." She struggled to articulate her concerns. "Edmund won't simply let me go if he tracks me there." "Do you think he will?" Patrick's voice was calm, but she sensed the alertness beneath. Sophia considered the question honestly. "Yes. Not because he loves me, I don't think he ever truly did, but because he sees me as his property. His pride won't allow me to leave." Patrick was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "When we reach Colorado Springs, I'll help you get settled somewhere safe. If you'd prefer, I can continue on to Denver afterward as planned, or—" He hesitated. "Or," Sophia prompted, "or I could stay a while until you're established, make sure there's no trouble." His expression was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested the offer meant more than mere protection. Warmth spread through Sophia's chest at his words. "I wouldn't want to delay your business." "Nothing that can't wait," Patrick replied simply. "Some things are more important." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. In just 2 days, something had begun to grow between them, a connection neither had anticipated but both could feel. Before Sophia could respond, Patrick's head snapped up, his attention caught by something beyond her vision. In one fluid motion, he was on his feet, hand moving to his holster. "Riders," he said quietly, "3 of them coming fast from the north." Fear clutched at Sophia's heart. "Edmund, can't tell yet, but we should move. Now." They extinguished the fire and mounted quickly, Patrick leading them into the denser forest where the trees would provide cover. From their concealed position, they watched as 3 horsemen thundered into the clearing they'd just vacated. Even from a distance, Sophia recognized the lead rider immediately, Edmund, his face twisted with rage as he surveyed the abandoned campsite. The 2 men with him were strangers, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of men accustomed to violence. "Hired guns," Patrick murmured, confirming her fears. "Your husband isn't taking any chances." Edmund dismounted, kneeling to examine the still warm embers of their fire. "They can't be far," he shouted to his companions. "The woman's with someone. Tracks show 2 horses." One of the men spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Want us to split up, Keller?" Edmund shook his head. "No, They're headed south. There's only one passable trail through these parts. We'll catch them before nightfall. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as terror washed over her. Edmund's expression promised violence beyond anything she'd experienced before, if he caught them. "We need to move," Patrick whispered, his hand briefly covering hers where it gripped Daisy's reins. "There's another way through the mountains, but it's dangerous. Are you willing to risk it?" "Anything is better than returning to him," Sophia replied, her voice steady despite her fear. With a nod, Patrick guided Merlin deeper into the forest, away from the established trail. Sophia followed closely, trusting him completely as they navigated through increasingly dense undergrowth. Behind them, Edmund and his hired men continued their pursuit along the main path, unaware that their quarry had chosen a different route. For hours they traveled in tense silence, the terrain growing steeper and more treacherous. Patrick occasionally dismounted to lead both horses through particularly difficult passages, his face grim with concentration. Sophia marveled at his woodcraft. Without a clear trail to follow, he navigated with confidence, using landmarks only he seemed able to recognize. By late afternoon, they had climbed high enough that the forest began to thin, replaced by rocky outcroppings and stunted pines bent by constant wind. The air grew noticeably colder as they ascended. "There's an old mining cabin ahead," Patrick said, breaking the long silence. "Used to belong to a prospector named Hanson. Might still be standing." "Will Edmund know about it?" Sophia asked, her teeth chattering slightly in the mountain chill. Patrick shook his head. "Doubt it. It's not on any map, and the trail we're using is one I found by accident years back." He glanced at her with concern. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she insisted, though exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. The bruises Edmund had given her throbbed with every movement of her horse. Patrick's eyes softened. "You're stronger than you know, Sophia Kennedy." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet certainty, buoyed her spirits as they continued their difficult journey. The sun was setting when they finally reached the abandoned mining cabin, little more than a crude shelter of logs and stone built against the mountainside. Half the roof had collapsed, but one corner remained intact enough to provide protection from the elements. "It's not much," Patrick apologized, helping Sophia dismount. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, muscles protesting after the grueling ride. "It's perfect," she replied sincerely. Anything was preferable to falling into Edmund's hands again. While Patrick tended to the exhausted horses, Sophia gathered what wood she could find for a fire. The temperature was dropping rapidly as darkness fell, and the thin dress she wore provided little protection against the mountain night. "No fire," Patrick said gently when he returned, seeing her efforts. "Smoke might be visible from below. Edmund and his men will be watching for any sign of us." Realizing he was right, Sophia abandoned her attempt, hugging herself against the cold. Patrick immediately shrugged out of his leather coat and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was heavy with his warmth and scent leather, pine, and something uniquely him. "What about you?" She protested. "I've weathered colder nights," he assured her. "Come, let's get what shelter we can." Inside the partial cabin, Patrick arranged their bedrolls in the corner where the roof remained intact. Sharing the space would be intimate, but necessary for warmth and safety. The propriety that might have concerned Sophia days earlier seemed trivial now compared to the dangers they faced. They ate a cold supper of the remaining rabbit from lunch, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. As full darkness descended, the temperature continued to drop, and Sophia found herself shivering despite Patrick's coat. "Here," he said, settling beside her on the bedrolls. "We'll need to share warmth tonight." With gentle movements, he arranged his blanket over both of them, carefully maintaining a respectful distance while still providing the heat of his body. Sophia's initial tension gradually eased as the shared warmth began to penetrate her chilled limbs. "Will they find us?" she whispered into the darkness. Patrick's voice came steady and reassuring. "Not tonight. We've left no trail they can follow easily. By morning, we'll be moving again, over the pass and down toward safer ground. And if they do find us—" His silence spoke volumes before he finally answered. "Then I'll do whatever's necessary to keep you safe. I give you my word on that." The quiet conviction in his voice wrapped around her like another blanket, soothing her fears. In the darkness, Sophia found herself studying what she could see of his profile: the strong line of his jaw, the steadiness of his breathing. This man, whom she'd known for mere days, was risking his life to protect her from a danger not his own. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You could have continued to Denver, left me in Colorado Springs. This isn't your fight." Patrick was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Before the war, I had a sister, Caroline. She married young to a man none of us really knew. By the time we realized what kind of man he truly was, it was too late." His voice caught slightly. "She died at his hands before I could help her escape." Sophia's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry. I went to war soon after. Thought maybe I could atone somehow by fighting for something meaningful." His laugh was hollow. "Found out war doesn't heal those kinds of wounds." Instinctively, Sophia reached out, her hand finding his in the darkness. His fingers closed gently around hers. "When I saw you at my campfire with those bruises," Patrick continued, "it was like seeing Caroline again. Given a second chance, I couldn't turn away." "Thank you," Sophia whispered, the words entirely inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Neither spoke again for some time, but their hands remained joined in the darkness, a connection that transcended words. Eventually, exhaustion claimed Sophia, and she drifted to sleep, her head coming to rest against Patrick's shoulder. Patrick remained awake, listening to her steady breathing, his senses alert for any sound that might signal danger. This woman he barely knew had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead: a desire to protect, to care for someone beyond himself, perhaps even to hope again. With that unsettling realization, he tightened his hold slightly on Sophia's hand and continued his vigilant watch through the cold mountain night. Dawn arrived with a pearlescent light that filtered through the broken roof of the cabin. Sophia awoke gradually, aware first of warmth, then of the steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. Sometime during the night she had nestled against Patrick's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. For a moment she remained still, reluctant to break the unexpected intimacy. It had been so long since she'd felt safe in a man's embrace. Edmund's arms had become a prison rather than a sanctuary long ago. Patrick stirred, his blue eyes opening to meet hers. Neither moved immediately, something unspoken passing between them in that quiet moment. "Morning," he finally said, his voice rough with sleep. "How are you feeling?" "Rested," she replied honestly, though she made no move to pull away. "Better than I should, given everything." A small smile touched his lips. "You're remarkably resilient, Sophia Kennedy." The way he said her name, her true name, the one she'd reclaimed for herself, sent a pleasant warmth through her chest. Reluctantly, she sat up, feeling the immediate loss of his warmth as the mountain air chilled her. Patrick rose and moved to the cabin's broken window, surveying the landscape below. His expression grew serious as he scanned the terrain. "Smoke," he said grimly. "About 2 miles down where the trail forks, Edmund and his men made camp there overnight." Fear returned, settling like ice in Sophia's stomach. "They're still looking," Patrick nodded, and they're between us and the most direct route to Colorado Springs." He turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. "We have two choices: try to circle around them, which means at least 3 more days in these mountains, or—" He hesitated. "Or," Sophia prompted, rising to join him at the window, "or we head west instead, toward Glenwood Springs. It's farther from your original destination, but Edmund won't expect that direction. We could lose him completely." Sophia considered their options. The thought of spending additional days in the wilderness, constantly looking over their shoulders, was daunting. Yet Glenwood Springs wasn't part of her hastily made plans. "What's in Glenwood Springs?" she asked. "It's growing faster than Colorado Springs," Patrick explained. "The hot springs attract tourists and there's money flowing in, which means opportunities, including schools for the children of wealthy visitors." His eyes met hers. "You might find teaching work there more easily than elsewhere." The prospect was tempting, not just the potential employment, but the greater distance from Edmund and the life she'd left behind. Still, uncertainty nagged at her. "And Denver, your business there," Patrick shrugged. "As I said before, nothing that can't wait." His gaze held her steadily. "The important thing is getting you somewhere safe, somewhere you can build a new life." Sophia's heart beat faster at the intensity in his eyes. She wondered if he was including himself in that picture of her future. The possibility both thrilled and frightened her. "Then Glenwood Springs it is," she decided, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Patrick's smile was brief but genuine. "We'll need to move quickly. The path west is treacherous, but it'll throw them off our trail." They prepared to leave with efficient movements, gathering their meager belongings and readying the horses. As Patrick helped Sophia mount Daisy, his hands lingered briefly at her waist, the touch sending an unexpected flutter through her. "Stay close," he instructed as they set off. "The trail narrows ahead, and one wrong step could be dangerous." He wasn't exaggerating. The path westward hugged the mountainside, often no wider than a single horse. Below them, the ground fell away sharply, revealing dizzying drops to the valley floor. Patrick rode ahead, occasionally dismounting to test particularly unstable sections before allowing Sophia to cross. By midday, they had climbed higher than Sophia had ever been, the air thin and sharp in her lungs. The view was breathtaking, endless mountains stretching toward the horizon, their peaks still capped with snow despite the autumn season. "It's beautiful," she breathed during a brief rest. "I've never seen anything like it." Patrick nodded, his eyes on the distant landscape. "First time I saw these mountains, I knew I'd never be content anywhere else. There's a freedom up here you can't find down below." "Is that why you've never settled in one place?" Sophia asked, curious about the life he'd led before their paths crossed. A shadow crossed his features. "Partly. After the war in Caroline, he trailed off. Sometimes moving feels easier than staying put, fewer ghosts that way." She understood that sentiment all too well. "Do you think you'll ever stop moving?" Patrick looked at her then, something unreadable in his expression. "Maybe, if I found the right reason to stay." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge what was developing this connection that had grown so rapidly from chance encounter to something deeper. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the path gradually descending as they followed a narrow valley westward. Patrick maintained a vigilant watch, frequently stopping to listen and check for signs of pursuit, but they encountered no one in the remote wilderness. As evening approached, they came upon a small plateau sheltered by a stone outcropping. A stream trickled nearby, providing fresh water for themselves and the horses. "We'll camp here," Patrick decided, dismounting. "Should be safe enough for a fire tonight. We're well off any trail Edmund might know." The prospect of warmth and hot food lifted Sophia's spirits considerably. While Patrick hunted for their supper, she gathered firewood and prepared a campsite, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple tasks. There was dignity in this self-sufficiency, so different from the controlled existence Edmund had imposed upon her. Patrick returned triumphant with 2 fat rabbits and a handful of wild onions. Together they prepared the meal, working in comfortable tandem as if they'd done so for years rather than days. As they sat beside the crackling fire, sharing the simple but satisfying stew, Sophia found herself studying Patrick's face in the dancing light. The hard lines of his jaw and cheekbones were softened by the firelight, revealing a gentleness she suspected few were privileged to see. "Tell me about your life before Edmund," he said suddenly, breaking their companionable silence. What was Sophia Kennedy like? The question startled her. Edmund had never shown interest in who she had been before becoming his wife. "I was happy, I think," she began slowly, memories surfacing that she hadn't allowed herself to revisit in years. "My father raised me alone after my mother died when I was 8. He was a good man, strict but fair. He believed in education, even for daughters, which wasn't common." Patrick listened attentively as she continued, describing her childhood on a small ranch outside Platteville, her love of books, her brief career as an assistant teacher. "I had dreams," she admitted, staring into the flames. "I wanted to open a proper school someday, one that would serve the children from outlying ranches who couldn't attend regularly in town." "That's still possible," Patrick said quietly. "Dreams don't die unless we let them." Sophia looked up, meeting his gaze across the fire. "For 3 years I almost forgot I ever had dreams of my own. Edmund. He made me believe I was nothing beyond being his wife, his potential vessel for sons." She swallowed hard. "I started to believe him." Patrick's expression darkened. "Men like Edmund can't bear to see others shine. They dim the light in those around them to feel powerful." His voice softened. "But your light's still there, Sophia. I can see it." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had been prepared to discover on this desperate journey. Sophia felt her heart quicken as Patrick held her gaze, the connection between them almost tangible in the night air. Before either could speak further, a distant sound broke the spell, the crack of a branch somewhere in the darkness beyond their campsite. Patrick was on his feet instantly, hand on his holster. "Get behind me," he whispered urgently, positioning himself between Sophia and the direction of the noise. Tense seconds passed as they listened, the only sounds their own breathing and the soft pop of the fire. Then came a rustle of movement, and Patrick drew his revolver in one smooth motion. "Show yourself," he called firmly, his stance protective. From the darkness emerged not a man, but a large buck deer, its antlers impressive against the night sky. It regarded them with liquid eyes for a moment before bounding away into the forest. The tension drained from Patrick's body as he holstered his weapon. "Just wildlife," he said with a relieved smile. "But we should probably turn in. Dawn comes early and we've got a long ride ahead tomorrow." As they prepared their bedrolls near the fire, the momentary fear had broken the intimate mood of their earlier conversation. Yet something had changed between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged, if not yet expressed. That night, they slept side by side for warmth, closer than propriety might dictate, but with the innocent necessity of travelers in the wilderness. Sophia's last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was how natural it felt to be here, under the vast Colorado sky, beside this man who had become so much more than a chance-met protector. For the first time since fleeing her home, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow rather than fearing it. The journey to Glenwood Springs took 4 more days of hard travel through some of the most beautiful and challenging terrain Sophia had ever encountered. Each day brought them farther from Edmund's reach, and with that growing distance came a gradual unburdening of her spirit. Patrick proved to be not just a skilled guide but a thoughtful companion. He shared his knowledge of the land freely, teaching Sophia how to identify edible plants, how to read weather changes in the sky, how to move through the forest with minimal disturbance. More importantly, he listened when she spoke, valuing her thoughts and observations in a way Edmund never had. Their evenings around the campfire became precious spaces of connection. They shared stories: Patrick of his pre-war years in Missouri, his time in the cavalry, his wandering since; Sophia of her childhood dreams, her brief teaching career, her hopes for what might lie ahead. Carefully at first, then with growing ease, they revealed themselves to each other, building a foundation of understanding that deepened with each passing day. On the afternoon of the 5th day since changing course, they crested a final ridge and saw Glenwood Springs spread below them in the valley, a bustling town nestled where 2 rivers met, steam rising from the famous hot springs that had made the settlement prosperous. "We made it," Sophia breathed, a mix of relief and trepidation washing over her. After days in the wilderness with only Patrick for company, the prospect of rejoining civilization was both welcome and daunting. Patrick reached across the space between their horses, his hand briefly covering hers. "A new beginning," he said simply. They made their way down to the town as sunset painted the surrounding mountains in hues of gold and crimson. Compared to Platteville, Glenwood Springs was almost a city, streets lined with substantial buildings, hotels catering to wealthy visitors seeking the healing waters, businesses that served both locals and tourists. Patrick led them to a modest boarding house on a quiet side street. "The widow Cooper runs this place," he explained. "Known her for years. She's discreet and kind." Mrs. Cooper proved to be a stout, gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes that took in Sophia's fading bruises and travel-worn appearance without comment. When Patrick quietly explained that Sophia needed lodging and perhaps employment advice, the older woman nodded understanding. "Got a nice room at the back of the house," she told Sophia. "Private entrance, gets good morning light. $2 a week including breakfast, but I could use help with the washing and mending if you're skilled with a needle. Might offset some of the cost." The arrangement was perfect: affordable lodging with an opportunity to earn her keep while she sought more permanent employment. Sophia accepted gratefully, relief washing over her at this first step toward independence. While Mrs. Cooper showed Sophia to her room, Patrick saw to stabling their horses at the livery down the street. When he returned, he carried Sophia's few belongings to her new quarters: a small but clean room with a narrow bed, washstand, and window overlooking a kitchen garden. "It's lovely," Sophia said sincerely, running her hand over the patchwork quilt that covered the bed. After nights sleeping on the ground, the modest room seemed luxurious. Patrick lingered in the doorway, suddenly awkward in a way he hadn't been during their journey. "I've taken a room at Graham's Hotel," he said. "It's just up the street. I'll need to see about some business matters tomorrow, but perhaps we could meet for dinner. I could show you around town a bit." Sophia smiled, touched by his continued concern for her welfare. "I'd like that very much." That evening, alone in her room for the first time since fleeing Edmund, Sophia bathed with water from the washbasin, scrubbing away the dust of travel. Mrs. Cooper had kindly provided a clean dress, slightly large but far better than the one Sophia had worn for days. As she brushed her honey blonde hair before the small mirror, Sophia studied her reflection. The bruises Edmund had given her were fading to yellowish shadows, her split lip healed to a faint line. But it was her eyes that showed the most change, no longer dulled with fear. They held a cautious hope she barely recognized. In just a week, she had traveled so much farther than the physical distance from Platteville to Glenwood Springs. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast in Mrs. Cooper's kitchen, Sophia set out to explore her new home. The town buzzed with activity, miners from nearby camps, tourists visiting the hot springs, shopkeepers and tradesmen going about their business. Following Mrs. Cooper's advice, Sophia visited the town school, a substantial building near the center of town. The headmistress, Mrs. Thornton, received her kindly but had no immediate positions available. However, the older woman added, seeing Sophia's disappointment, the Hartwell Hotel has been seeking a governess for the children of their long-term guests. With your teaching experience, you might be well suited. The suggestion led Sophia to the grandest building in Glenwood Springs, a 3-story hotel of red brick with wide verandas and elegant furnishings. The manager, Mr. Phillips, interviewed her briefly and seemed impressed by her education and previous experience. We have several families who stay with us for months at a time, taking the waters, he explained. Their children require continuing education during their residence. The position pays $30 monthly, with a private room here at the hotel included. It was more than Sophia had dared hope for, not just employment but respectable accommodation as well. When Mr. Phillips offered her the position pending references, she nearly wept with relief. I can provide a letter from the school board in Platteville, she assured him, carefully avoiding mention of Edmund. And Mrs. Cooper at the boarding house knows me. Excellent. If you could begin next Monday. We currently have 3 families with children between the ages of 6 and 12. Sophia left the Hartwell Hotel with her head spinning at how quickly her fortunes had turned. In a single morning, she had secured potential employment that would utilize her skills and provide independence. It seemed almost too good to be true after years of Edmund's oppression. That evening, when Patrick called at the boarding house to escort her to dinner, Sophia shared her news with barely contained excitement. His genuine pleasure in her success warmed her heart as they walked to a small restaurant near the center of town. I knew you'd find your place quickly, he said, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowded street. You have too much to offer to go unnoticed for long. Over a simple but delicious meal, they discussed her new position and the possibilities it presented. Patrick listened attentively, his blue eyes rarely leaving her face as she outlined her plans and hopes. And what of your business here? Sophia finally asked, realizing he had shared little about his own activities. A shadow crossed Patrick's features. It's complicated. I'm looking for someone, actually, a man who may have information about my sister's death. Sophia's heart constricted at the pain visible in his expression. After all these years, Patrick nodded, absently turning his coffee cup in his hands. Her husband fled after her death before he could face justice. There have been rumors he was seen in this area recently. His jaw tightened. I need to know for certain. Is that why you were headed to Denver originally? Partly, he admitted. I have contacts there who send word when there are sightings. The message that reached me mentioned both Denver and Glenwood Springs as possibilities. Sophia reached across the table, her hand covering his. I hope you find the closure you're seeking. His fingers interlaced with hers, the touch sending warmth through her arm. I'm beginning to think closure might come in unexpected forms, he said quietly, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Patrick smiled slightly, breaking the tension. But enough of old ghosts. Tonight is about celebrating your new beginning. As they walked back to the boarding house after dinner, Patrick kept her hand tucked in the crook of his arm. The evening was cool but pleasant, the streets of Glenwood Springs alive with activity even as darkness fell. Lanterns glowed in windows, and music drifted from the larger hotels where evening entertainments were underway. At the door to Mrs. Cooper's establishment, they paused, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Thank you," Sophia said softly. "Not just for dinner, but for everything. I wouldn't be here, wouldn't have this chance at a new life if not for you." Patrick shook his head slightly. "You would have found your way, Sophia. You're stronger than you know." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm grateful our paths crossed all the same." In the gentle light spilling from the boarding house windows, Patrick's expression softened. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to her cheek, his fingers barely grazing the now faded bruise Edmund had left. "So am I," he murmured. For a heartbeat, Sophia thought he might kiss her. Part of her, a growing, insistent part, hoped he would, but Patrick stepped back, his hand falling away as he tipped his hat respectfully. "Good night, Sophia Kennedy. Sleep well." As she watched him walk back toward his hotel, Sophia pressed her fingers to her cheek where his touch lingered like a promise. She was not ready yet, not for romance, not with the shadow of Edmund still looming in her recent past. But for the first time since her ill-fated marriage, she found herself looking toward the future with something more than fear. That night, as she settled into her narrow bed at the boarding house, Sophia allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been circling for days. She was falling in love with Patrick Sullivan. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Could she trust these feelings? Could she trust any man after Edmund's betrayal? But Patrick had proven himself different in every way that mattered, patient where Edmund was demanding, gentle where Edmund was cruel, respectful where Edmund had been controlling. In the space of a week, he had shown her more consideration than her husband had in 3 years of marriage. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Sophia drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with mountain trails and blue eyes that truly saw her for who she was. The next days passed in a whirl of activity as Sophia settled into Glenwood Springs. Mrs. Cooper proved a kind landlady, and the work Sophia did to offset her rent, mending linens and helping with laundry, was far preferable to the backbreaking labor Edmund had demanded of her on their ranch. Patrick came by each evening, sometimes taking her to dinner, other times simply walking with her through town or along the riverbank. He never presumed, never pushed for more than she offered, but Sophia could feel the connection between them deepening with each shared conversation, each quiet moment of understanding. On Sunday, he escorted her to church, standing tall and respectful beside her in the pew. Afterward, several townspeople approached to introduce themselves, clearly taking Patrick's presence as endorsement of the newcomer. Sophia marveled at how differently she was received with him at her side, not as a suspicious stranger, but as someone worthy of welcome. Monday brought her first day at the Hartwell Hotel. Mr. Phillips introduced her to the 3 families whose children would be her pupils: the Andersons with their twin boys aged 9, the Winthrops with a serious 12-year-old daughter, and the Cavendishes with 2 girls aged 6 and 8. All were from wealthy Eastern families, staying in Glenwood Springs for extended periods, while family members took the mineral waters for various ailments. The hotel had converted a bright room on the 2nd floor into a schoolroom, complete with a small blackboard, maps on the walls, and individual desks for each child. After the initial awkwardness of introductions, Sophia found herself slipping easily back into teaching, her confidence growing as the children responded to her gentle but firm guidance. By week's end, she had established a routine that brought unexpected fulfillment. Mornings and early afternoons were devoted to teaching, while late afternoons found her either helping Mrs. Cooper or exploring her new home. Evenings belonged to Patrick, their time together becoming the highlight of each day. During their walks and conversations, Patrick shared more about his search for his brother-in-law, Andrew Blackwell, the man responsible for his sister's death. He was charming, educated. No one suspected what he was capable of behind closed doors, Patrick explained one evening as they sat on a bench overlooking the river. Not until it was too late. Sophia shivered, the parallels to her own situation all too apparent. How did you discover the truth? Patrick's face darkened with old pain. Caroline wrote to me while I was away at university, carefully worded letters that hinted at problems but never stated them outright. I was young, preoccupied with my studies. I missed the signs. His hands clenched into fists. When I finally visited them, I saw bruises she tried to hide. When I confronted her, she broke down, admitted he'd been beating her for months. What did you do? Sophia asked softly. I tried to convince her to leave with me that day. But she was afraid of the scandal, afraid he'd find her. Patrick stared at the rushing water, his expression haunted. I promised to return in a week with a proper plan. But 3 days later, a neighbor found her dead at the bottom of the stairs. Andrew claimed it was an accident that she'd fallen. He disappeared before the authorities could question him further. Sophia took his hand, offering what comfort she could for a wound so deep. And you've been searching for him ever since, on and off, Patrick admitted. The war intervened, and afterward, I drifted, but I've never stopped looking completely. Every few years, a rumor surfaces and I follow it as far as I can. What will you do if you find him? Patrick was silent for a long moment, his gaze still fixed on the river. I used to think I wanted vengeance, an eye for an eye. He turned to look at her, his expression softening. Now I'm not so sure. Justice, yes, but vengeance. It consumes the one seeking it as surely as it destroys its target. Sophia squeezed his hand gently. Whatever you decide, whatever happens, you don't have to face it alone. The simple offer of support seemed to touch him deeply. For a moment, Patrick simply looked at her, something vulnerable and wondering in his gaze. Then, with deliberate slowness, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. Unlike Edmund's demanding, possessive kisses, Patrick's was an offering rather than a taking, tender, questioning, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Sophia found herself leaning into the contact, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, Patrick rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. I've wanted to do that since the moment you rode into my camp, he confessed quietly. Sophia smiled, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with joy. I'm glad you finally did. That kiss marked a turning point in their relationship. Though Patrick remained respectful, never overstepping the boundaries of propriety, there was a new openness between them, an acknowledged current of feeling that transformed their time together. They spoke more freely of the future, of possibilities, of hopes that included each other. 2 weeks passed in this new, sweeter rhythm. Sophia's position at the hotel proved rewarding, her pupils responding well to her teaching methods. The bruises Edmund had given her faded completely, and with them, some of the fear that had become her constant companion. In the safety of Glenwood Springs, surrounded by new friends and Patrick's steady presence, she began to believe that she might truly have escaped her past. Then came the letter that shattered her fragile peace. It arrived at the boarding house on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a stagecoach driver who mentioned he'd brought it from Platteville. Mrs. Cooper handed it to Sophia with a concerned look, clearly noting her tenant's sudden pallor at the sight of the familiar handwriting on the envelope. Alone in her room, Sophia's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Edmund's bold, slashing script filled the single page. "Sophia, your disappearance has brought shame upon me and questions I cannot answer. This defiance will not stand. I know you have fled to Glenwood Springs. I know about the cowboy who helped you escape. Return to your rightful place by the end of the month, or I will come for you myself. What happens then will be on your head alone." Edmund, the paper slipped from Sophia's numb fingers as terror washed over her in a cold wave. How had he found her? Who had betrayed her location? The questions tumbled through her mind as she sank onto the edge of her bed, nausea rising in her throat. When Patrick arrived that evening to escort her to dinner, one look at her face told him something was terribly wrong. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His expression darkened as he read, jaw tightening with each line. "We'll leave," he said immediately, crumpling the paper in his fist. "Tonight if necessary. I have friends in Wyoming, Montana, places he'd never think to look." Sophia shook her head, a strange calm settling over her despite her fear. "No, I won't spend my life running, looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to appear." She straightened her shoulders, meeting Patrick's concerned gaze. "This is my home now. I have work I care about, people who value me. I won't let him take that away." Patrick knelt before her where she sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hands in his. "Sophia, he's dangerous. You know what he's capable of." "So do you," she said quietly. "And you're still searching for your sister's abuser after all these years. Would you have me do any less to secure my own freedom?" Patrick's expression softened with understanding and something deeper pride, perhaps, at her courage. "No," he admitted, "but I won't let you face him alone." "I was counting on that," Sophia said, managing a small smile despite her fear. Together, they formulated a plan. Edmund had given them until the end of the month, approximately 2 weeks. Rather than wait for his arrival, they would prepare to meet the threat head-on, but on their terms rather than his. "The first step is legal protection," Patrick advised. "You're still legally his wife, which gives him certain rights under the law." The next morning found them in the office of Judge Williams, Glenwood Springs' most respected legal authority. The elderly judge listened gravely as Sophia detailed her marriage to Edmund, the abuse she had suffered, and the threat he now posed. Patrick remained at her side, his presence a silent bulwark of support. "Divorce is possible but complicated," the judge explained when she had finished. "Colorado Territory has more progressive laws than many states, but the process takes time you may not have based on this threat." "What alternatives do we have?" Patrick asked. Judge Williams stroked his white beard thoughtfully. "A restraining order is our best immediate option. It won't dissolve the marriage, but it will legally prohibit Mr. Keller from approaching or harming Mrs. Keller." He looked at Sophia directly. "I'll need sworn testimony about the abuse and any evidence you can provide." Sophia nodded, steeling herself to revisit memories she tried to suppress. For the next hour, she detailed Edmund's violence, the escalation after each miscarriage, the isolation he'd imposed, the threats that had finally driven her to flee. Patrick remained silent but watchful, his hand occasionally covering hers when particularly painful recollections caused her voice to falter. "I believe you have grounds not only for protection but for eventual divorce," Judge Williams declared when she had finished. "I'll issue the restraining order today. Should Mr. Keller violate it, he can be arrested immediately." It was a first step, But both Sophia and Patrick knew legal papers alone wouldn't stop Edmund if he was determined. The next phase of their plan involved ensuring Sophia was never alone and vulnerable. Mr. Phillips at the Hartwell Hotel readily agreed to move her from the boarding house into the teacher's quarters at the hotel itself, rooms that were more secure and constantly staffed. Sheriff Johnson, after hearing their concerns, promised increased patrols near the hotel and offered to speak with Edmund should he appear in town. Patrick, meanwhile, made discreet inquiries about Edmund's movements. Through telegraph messages to contacts in Platteville, he learned that Edmund had indeed been asking questions about Glenwood Springs, had sold some cattle for cash, and had been seen cleaning his hunting rifle. "He's coming," Patrick confirmed grimly after receiving the latest telegram. "Probably within the week, based on what my sources say." Sophia absorbed this news with remarkable composure, her initial terror having given way to resolute determination. "Then we'll be ready for him." The waiting proved more difficult than either had anticipated. Each day brought increased tension, each unknown rider entering town a potential threat. Patrick took to spending his nights in the hotel lobby, unwilling to leave Sophia unprotected even in the supposedly secure building. Despite the strain, life continued. Sophia taught her pupils each day, finding solace in their innocent enthusiasm. Evenings were spent with Patrick, their relationship deepening in the face of shared danger. They spoke often of the future of the divorce Sophia would pursue once Edmund was dealt with, of Patrick's lingering search for Andrew Blackwell, of possibilities neither had dared imagine before finding each other. On the 7th day after receiving Edmund's letter, the confrontation they had been preparing for finally came. Sophia was just finishing her afternoon lessons when commotion erupted in the hotel lobby below. A man's voice, achingly, terrifyingly familiar, rose above the general murmur of guests. "Where is she? Where is my wife?" Patrick, who had been waiting nearby as had become his custom, appeared immediately at the classroom door. "Stay here with the children," he instructed quietly. "Lock the door behind me." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving with purposeful strides toward the confrontation below. Sophia ushered her pupils to the back of the classroom, told them to remain quiet, and locked the door as instructed. But she couldn't resist moving to the window that overlooked the street entrance to the hotel, needing to see what was happening. Below, Edmund stood in the center of the lobby, his face flushed with anger as he confronted the hotel manager. He looked thinner than when she'd last seen him, his usually neat appearance disheveled from travel, but no less intimidating for the change. "Mr. Keller," Patrick's voice carried clearly as he approached, "I believe you're in violation of a restraining order." Edmund spun to face the new speaker, his eyes narrowing with recognition and hatred. "Sullivan, so the rumors were true. You're the one who stole my wife." "No one stole your wife," Patrick replied evenly, keeping a careful distance between them. "Sophia left of her own free will to escape your abuse. The law is on her side in this matter." Edmund's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. "The law? A piece of paper won't keep me from what's rightfully mine." His hand moved toward his coat, where the outline of a holstered pistol was visible. "I wouldn't," Patrick warned quietly. "Sheriff Johnson is on his way, and there are witnesses all around you. Think carefully about your next move, Keller." Indecision flickered across Edmund's features as he registered the hotel guests and staff watching the confrontation with alarm. His hand hesitated at his coat. "She's my wife," Edmund insisted, though with less conviction than before. "I have the right to speak with her at least." "That right was forfeited when you raised your hand to her," Patrick replied, his voice controlled but laced with steel. "Sophia has made her choice clear. The only thing for you to do now is respect that choice and leave." Edmund's eyes darted around the lobby, perhaps searching for sympathy or support, but finding none. The gathered onlookers' expressions ranged from curiosity to open disapproval directed at him. "This isn't over," he finally growled, backing toward the door. "Tell her that. This isn't over by a long shot." He stormed out just as Sheriff Johnson arrived, nearly colliding with the lawman on the steps of the hotel. A brief, tense exchange followed, the sheriff's hand resting meaningfully on his holster as he spoke to Edmund. Whatever was said seemed to further deflate Edmund's bravado. With a final glare at the hotel, he mounted his horse and rode away, the sheriff watching until he disappeared down the main street. Only when Edmund was completely out of sight did Sophia realize she'd been holding her breath. She sank into a nearby chair, legs suddenly too weak to support her. The children, sensing her distress, gathered around with worried expressions. "Are you unwell, Mrs. Kennedy?" young Alice Cavendish asked, her small hand patting Sophia's arm. Sophia managed a reassuring smile for her pupils. "I'm quite well, thank you, just a bit tired." "Why don't you all gather your things? I believe that's enough lessons for today." After seeing the children safely to their parents, Sophia made her way downstairs where Patrick waited, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "He's gone for now," he told her quietly. Sheriff Johnson reminded him about the restraining order and suggested the town jail would be his next destination if he violated it again. "But he'll be back," Sophia said, not a question but a certainty. Patrick nodded grimly. "Men like Edmund don't give up easily, but neither do we." That evening, ensconced in the relative safety of her hotel room, Sophia and Patrick discussed their limited options. The confrontation in the hotel lobby had bought them time but not resolution. "We could still leave," Patrick suggested, though without much conviction. "Start fresh somewhere Edmund wouldn't think to look." Sophia shook her head firmly. "No, I meant what I said before. I won't spend my life running from him. There must be another way to end this once and for all." They sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes. Finally, Patrick spoke, his voice hesitant. "There is one possibility we haven't considered. It's unconventional." "I'm listening," Sophia encouraged, willing to consider any solution that might free her permanently from Edmund's shadow. Patrick met her gaze directly, something vulnerable in his blue eyes. "Marry me." Sophia blinked in surprise. "But I'm already married. That's the problem we're trying to solve." "Hear me out," Patrick continued, taking her hands in his. "Judge Williams said divorce is possible but takes time. However, he also mentioned that marriages can be annulled under certain circumstances, including if the husband has abandoned or abused his wife." "Yes, but that still takes legal proceedings, time we may not have before Edmund tries something desperate." Patrick nodded. "True. But there's another option, one that's been recognized in frontier territories for generations: common law marriage." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand as he explained. "If we declare our intention to be husband and wife before witnesses, live openly as a married couple, and you take my name, it creates a legal complication Edmund would be hard-pressed to overcome." "Two husbands?" Sophia asked, trying to understand. "In essence, yes." "It would force a legal reckoning. Either Edmund would have to prove his marriage is still valid despite the abuse and abandonment, or the court would have to decide between the two claims." Patrick's expression grew more serious. "At the very least, it would give you my name and my protection in a way Edmund couldn't easily challenge." Sophia considered the proposal, her mind racing. "Would it work legally?" "Judge Williams could advise us better than I can," Patrick admitted. "But common law marriages have been upheld in courts throughout the territories." At minimum, it would complicate Edmund's claim until a proper divorce could be obtained. The practicality of the suggestion was clear, but Sophia sensed there was more to Patrick's proposal than legal strategy. "Is that the only reason you're suggesting this?" she asked softly. Patrick's gaze didn't waver. "No," he said simply. "I love you, Sophia. I think I have since you rode into my camp that first night. I'd have asked you properly once you were free of Edmund, given you the courtship you deserve. But circumstances being what they are." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm asking now, not just as protection against Edmund, but because I want to build a life with you." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. In the short weeks she'd known him, Patrick had shown her more care, more respect, more genuine affection than Edmund had in 3 years of marriage. What had begun as a chance encounter had grown into something she'd never expected to find: true partnership, mutual respect, and yes, love. "Yes," she whispered, her heart suddenly light despite the circumstances that had prompted his proposal. "Yes, I'll marry you, Patrick Sullivan." The relief and joy that transformed his face told her everything she needed to know about the depth of his feelings. Gently, reverently, he kissed her a seal on a promise that went far beyond legal maneuvering. The next morning found them in Judge Williams' office, explaining their plan. The elderly jurist listened thoughtfully, occasionally nodding as Patrick outlined their reasoning. "It's unorthodox," he admitted when they had finished, "but not without precedent. Common law marriages have indeed been recognized in Colorado territory, particularly in cases where official ceremonies aren't practical." He looked at Sophia directly. "However, I must caution you, this creates a legal ambiguity rather than a clear resolution. Mr. Keller could still contest the validity of both the restraining order and the common law marriage." "We understand the risks," Sophia assured him. "But given the immediate threat Edmund poses, we believe this offers the best protection while we pursue more permanent legal remedies." Judge Williams nodded slowly. "In that case, I can witness your declaration today and provide documentation that may prove useful should this matter come before the court." He rose from behind his desk. "Let us proceed, then." The ceremony, if it could be called that, was brief and unadorned. Before Judge Williams and his clerk as witnesses, Patrick and Sophia declared their intention to live as husband and wife. They signed a document the judge prepared, officially recording Sophia's adoption of the Sullivan name and their mutual commitment. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan," the judge said when the paperwork was complete. "I'll file these documents immediately and inform Sheriff Johnson of the development. It won't stop Mr. Keller entirely, but it creates legal obstacles he'll find difficult to circumvent." As they left the judge's office, Patrick took Sophia's hand in his. "Not exactly the wedding day I'd have chosen for you," he said apologetically. Sophia squeezed his fingers, smiling up at him. "It was perfect in its own way, honest, direct, like you." News of their marriage spread quickly through Glenwood Springs' active gossip network. By evening, well-wishers were stopping by the Hartwell Hotel to offer congratulations, many bringing small gifts or flowers. Mr. Phillips, who had become something of a protective figure to Sophia during her employment, insisted on hosting an impromptu celebration in the hotel dining room. "Every bride deserves a proper reception," he declared, arranging for champagne and cake to be served to hotel guests and the couple's friends from town. In the midst of the unexpected festivities, Sophia found herself studying her new husband across the room as he chatted with Sheriff Johnson and Judge Williams. Patrick caught her gaze and smiled, excusing himself to make his way to her side. "Happy?" he asked quietly, his hand finding hers. "Yes," she replied with perfect honesty. Despite the circumstances, despite Edmund's looming threat, despite the unusual path that had led them here, yes, she was happy. Happier than she'd believed possible just weeks ago. The question of living arrangements had been resolved earlier that day. Patrick had given up his hotel room, moving his few possessions into Sophia's quarters at the Hartwell. Mr. Phillips, far from objecting to the arrangement, had offered them a larger suite normally reserved for wealthy guests, insisting it was the hotel's wedding gift to them. That night, as they retired to their new rooms, a certain awkwardness descended that hadn't been present during their nights camping in the wilderness. This was different intentional intimacy, rather than necessary proximity. "I can sleep in the sitting room," Patrick offered, sensing her nervousness. "There's no rush, Sophia. This marriage may have happened quickly, but everything else can proceed at whatever pace feels right to you." His consideration touched her deeply. Edmund had never once considered her comfort or readiness, taking what he wanted when he wanted it with little regard for her feelings. "No," she said softly, reaching for Patrick's hand. "I'd like you to stay with me. We are husband and wife after all." She smiled slightly. "Even if it is by common law." Their first night together as husband and wife was a revelation to Sophia. Patrick's tenderness, his careful attention to her comfort and pleasure, his evident joy in their union, all of it was so different from what she had known with Edmund that it felt like discovering an entirely new aspect of human connection. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the hotel room's curtains, Sophia felt a sense of peace she had nearly forgotten was possible. "I never thought I could feel this way," she admitted softly, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Safe. Cherished." Patrick's arms tightened around her. "That's how you deserve to feel every day for the rest of your life," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I intend to make sure you do." The days that followed took on a dreamlike quality for Sophia. She continued teaching at the hotel, now introduced to parents and visitors as Mrs. Sullivan. Patrick found work with a local rancher who needed experienced hands, allowing him to remain close to Glenwood Springs while earning their keep. Evenings were spent together, building the foundation of their life as husband and wife. Edmund's shadow still loomed, but less prominently with each passing day. Sheriff Johnson reported that Keller had been seen at a saloon in a neighboring town, apparently drowning his frustrations in whiskey rather than pursuing immediate action. The restraining order, combined with the legal complication of Sophia's new marriage, seemed to have temporarily checked his determination to reclaim her. Nearly 2 weeks passed in this new, cautious happiness. Sophia began to hope that perhaps Edmund had finally accepted defeat, that he might return to Platteville and leave them in peace. Then came the fire. It started just after midnight, flames erupting suddenly from the rear of the Hartwell Hotel where deliveries were received and kitchen supplies stored. Patrick woke first, alerted by the smell of smoke seeping under their door. "Sophia," he shook her awake urgently. "Fire, we need to go. Now." Barely pausing to grab her shawl, Sophia followed Patrick into the hallway, already filling with smoke. Other guests were emerging from their rooms in various states of undress and panic. "This way," Patrick called, guiding not just Sophia but several disoriented travelers toward the main staircase. "Stay low to avoid the smoke." The scene in the hotel lobby was one of controlled chaos. Mr. Phillips and his staff were directing guests toward the front entrance while bellboys ran with buckets of water toward the spreading flames at the rear. "The children," Sophia gasped, suddenly remembering her pupils who lived in the hotel with their families. "I need to make sure they're safe," Patrick nodded, understanding. "Go. I'll help with the evacuation. Meet me in the street when you're sure they're accounted for." Sophia hurried from room to room, checking on the Anderson twins, the Winthrop girl, and the Cavendish sisters. Finding all safely evacuated with their parents, she finally made her way outside where a crowd had gathered to watch as volunteer firefighters battled the blaze. The night air was cool after the smoke-filled hotel, and Sophia drew deep breaths as she scanned the crowd for Patrick. He had said he would meet her outside, but minutes passed with no sign of him. Growing increasingly anxious, she approached Mr. Phillips, who was directing the firefighting efforts. "Have you seen my husband?" she asked urgently. The manager shook his head. "Not since we began the evacuation. He was helping guests from the upper floors last I saw him." Fear clutched at Sophia's heart as she stared at the hotel, flames now visible through several windows on the ground floor. Patrick was still inside. Before she could move toward the building, a commotion near the side entrance caught her attention. Two figures emerged from the smoke, Patrick supporting an elderly man who was clearly struggling to walk. "Doctor," Patrick called hoarsely as they cleared the doorway. "He needs help." Smoke inhalation. Sophia rushed to his side as willing hands took charge of the injured guest. Patrick's face was smudged with soot, his eyes red from the smoke, but he appeared otherwise unharmed. "You're all right," she breathed, throwing her arms around him, heedless of the watching crowd. Patrick hugged her tightly, his voice rough from the smoke. "I'm fine. Just needed to make sure everyone got out." As they stood together watching the firefighters work, Sheriff Johnson approached, his expression grim. "This wasn't an accident," he informed them quietly. "My deputy found evidence of deliberate setting. Coal oil poured along the back entrance with a slow-burning fuse." Patrick's arm tightened around Sophia's shoulders. "Edmund," he said flatly. The sheriff nodded. "Most likely. He was seen in town earlier today, though he kept his distance from the hotel. I've got men searching for him now." The implications were chilling. Edmund had progressed from threats to actual violence, endangering not just Sophia and Patrick, but dozens of innocent hotel guests and staff. "He's escalating," Patrick observed, his expression hardening. "Next time could be worse." "If we can prove he set the fire, he'll hang," Sheriff Johnson assured them. "Arson is a capital offense, but proof would be difficult to obtain, and all three of them knew it. Edmund might have been careful, might have established an alibi, might escape justice yet again." As dawn broke over Glenwood Springs, the fire at the Hartwell Hotel was finally extinguished. The damage was substantial but not catastrophic. The rear portion of the building was destroyed, but the main structure remained intact. No lives had been lost, though several guests and staff had suffered minor injuries. In the aftermath, Mr. Phillips offered Patrick and Sophia temporary accommodations in an undamaged wing of the hotel, but Patrick declined. "It's not safe," he explained privately to Sophia as they collected what belongings had survived the fire. "Edmund knows we're here, knows the layout. We need somewhere less predictable." "But where?" Sophia asked, exhaustion evident in her voice after the night's ordeal. Patrick considered for a moment. "I have a friend who owns a small cabin about 5 miles outside town. Remote but comfortable. We could stay there until Edmund is apprehended." The plan made sense. By mid-morning they had packed their salvaged possessions, and after Sophia arranged for her pupils to continue their studies with Mrs. Thornton at the town school, they rode out of Glenwood Springs toward the promised sanctuary. The cabin proved to be a sturdy, well-maintained structure nestled in a small clearing surrounded by pines. A stream ran nearby, providing fresh water, and the interior was simple but comfortable: a main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. "It's perfect," Sophia declared, immediately seeing the potential in the rustic space. Defensible too, she added with newfound pragmatism. Patrick smiled at her assessment. My thoughts exactly. Good sightlines in all directions, limited approaches, solid walls. He unloaded their supplies from the horses. We can be comfortable here while we wait for news of Edmund. They settled into a cautious routine over the next few days. Patrick rode into town each morning for supplies and information, returning by midday to spend the afternoons with Sophia. They took turns keeping watch, never leaving the cabin unattended, always alert for signs of intrusion. Despite the circumstances, there was a domestic tranquility to their days that both found unexpectedly satisfying. Sophia tended the cabin and prepared meals from their limited supplies, often experimenting with wild herbs and berries she gathered from the surrounding forest. Patrick hunted small game, repaired the cabin's few deficiencies, and taught Sophia how to use the revolver he insisted she carry. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from the few books they had brought, sometimes simply talking about their hopes for the future once Edmund no longer threatened their peace. I'd like to build a proper home, Patrick confessed one night as they sat side by side on the cabin's small sofa. Not too far from town, but with enough land for horses, maybe a few cattle. You'd settle in one place, Sophia asked, surprised. No more wandering. Patrick's arm tightened around her shoulders. I've found a reason to stay put, he said simply, pressing a kiss to her temple. On the 5th day of their self-imposed exile, Sheriff Johnson rode out to the cabin with news. Edmund Keller was spotted in Denver yesterday, he informed them as they sat around the cabin's small table. Apparently trying to hire more men for some purpose he wouldn't specify. He's not giving up, Sophia said quietly, her hand finding Patrick's under the table. The sheriff nodded grimly. I've wired the authorities there to apprehend him if possible, but he seems to be moving frequently, staying ahead of the law. How long can this continue? Sophia asked, frustration evident in her voice. Are we to live in fear indefinitely? Sheriff Johnson had no easy answers. As he prepared to leave, he handed Patrick a folded paper. Judge Williams asked me to deliver this, the paperwork to formally begin divorce proceedings. He says Mrs. Sullivan can sign and return it when you next come to town. After the sheriff departed, Sophia sat at the table, staring at the legal document that could finally, officially end her connection to Edmund Keller. With trembling fingers, she signed where indicated, her new name Sophia Sullivan flowing naturally from her pen. It's done, she said softly, looking up at Patrick who stood nearby. Or at least begun. He came to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders, one step closer to being truly free of him. That night, as they prepared for bed, a new tension seemed to fill the small cabin. The signing of the divorce papers had shifted something between them, making their common-law marriage feel more real, more permanent. "What are you thinking?" Patrick asked, noting her pensive expression as she brushed her honey-blonde hair before the small mirror. Sophia met his gaze in the reflection. That I want this to be over, not just Edmund's threats, but the waiting, the uncertainty. I want to begin our real life together without shadows hanging over us. Patrick crossed the room to stand behind her, his hands gently taking the brush from hers to continue the task she had begun. Each stroke was careful, tender in a way that made her heart constrict with emotion. "We will," he promised, his voice low and certain. "One way or another, this will end, and we'll have that life together." The intimacy that followed was different from their previous nights together, deeper, more urgent, as if both needed to affirm their connection in the face of continuing threat. Afterward, as moonlight spilled through the cabin's small window, Sophia lay in Patrick's arms, listening to the night sounds of the forest beyond their walls. "I love you," she whispered, realizing she had never actually said the words aloud, though she had felt them for weeks. Patrick's arms tightened around her, his voice rough with emotion. "And I love you, Sophia Sullivan, more than I thought possible." They fell asleep thus entwined, finding peace in each other despite the uncertainty that still surrounded them. The confrontation, when it finally came, arrived in the gray light of dawn 2 days later. Sophia woke to the sound of Patrick moving quietly through the cabin, checking windows, his revolver already holstered at his hip. "Riders," he explained softly when he saw she was awake. "At least 3, moving toward the cabin from the south." She rose quickly, donning her dress with efficient movements. "Edmund, can't tell yet," Patrick replied, peering through a gap in the shutters. "But they're trying to approach quietly, not a good sign." Sophia retrieved the revolver Patrick had given her, checking it was loaded as he had taught her. Fear churned in her stomach, but alongside it was a steely determination. She would not be a victim again, not Edmund's, not anyone's. "There," Patrick said, tension evident in his voice. "That's him in the lead. Edmund, and 2 others with him." Sophia joined him at the window, her heart hammering as she caught sight of her estranged husband for the first time since the confrontation at the hotel. Even at a distance, she could see the rigid anger in his posture as he dismounted, gesturing for his companions to spread out around the cabin. "They're trying to surround us," Patrick observed grimly. "Cut off any escape." "What do we do?" Sophia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Patrick's expression was resolute. "We end this. Now." He moved to the cabin door, calling out before Sophia could stop him. "That's far enough, Keller, we know you're there." Edmund's voice came back immediately, harsh in the morning stillness. "Send out my wife, Sullivan." "This doesn't have to involve you." "She's not your wife anymore," Patrick replied evenly. "The divorce papers are filed. It's over." A bark of derisive laughter was Edmund's response. "Papers don't mean anything out here. She's mine until I say otherwise." Sophia moved to Patrick's side, her hand finding his briefly. "Let me speak to him," she said quietly. Patrick looked down at her, concern evident in his eyes. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she replied with newfound confidence. "This began with me. It should end with me too." After a moment's hesitation, Patrick nodded, though he positioned himself protectively as Sophia stepped forward. "Edmund," she called, her voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "This has gone far enough. You need to accept that our marriage is over." There was a pause. Then Edmund emerged from behind a tree at the edge of the clearing, his rifle held ready but not directly aimed at the cabin. He looked haggard, his once handsome features twisted with bitterness. "Come home, Sophia," he said, his tone almost pleading despite the weapon in his hands. "I'll forget this. Indiscretion. We can start fresh." Sophia shook her head, standing straighter despite the fear that still coursed through her. "No, Edmund, I'm not coming back. Not now, not ever. What we had wasn't a marriage, it was a prison. I've found something real now, something you never gave me." Edmund's expression hardened, his momentary vulnerability vanishing. "With him, this drifter, this nothing," he spat the words. "You think he can give you what I can." "I have land, a home, and a fist ready to fall whenever you're displeased," Sophia interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Patrick has given me the one thing you never did respect. He sees me as a person, not a possession." "Enough of this," Edmund snarled, raising his rifle slightly. "You're coming with me now, or I'll kill him and take you anyway." Before he could aim properly, Patrick stepped fully in front of Sophia, his own revolver now drawn and leveled. "That's not going to happen, Keller. The lady has made her choice. Accept it and ride away while you still can." For a tense moment, no one moved. Sophia could hear the blood pounding in her ears, could feel Patrick's steady presence before her like a shield. In the distance, a bird called, the normalcy of the sound almost shocking in the charged atmosphere. Then, with deliberate slowness, Edmund lowered his rifle. For a heartbeat, Sophia dared to hope the confrontation might end peacefully after all. "You think you've won," Edmund said, his voice eerily calm now. "That you can just take what's mine and there are no consequences." His eyes, when they met Sophia's, were cold with hatred. "If I can't have her, neither will you." Everything happened at once. Edmund raised his rifle with surprising speed, not toward Patrick as expected, but directly at Sophia. Patrick shouted a warning, pushing her roughly aside as he fired his own weapon. One of Edmund's companions broke cover, his pistol barking twice in rapid succession. Sophia stumbled, fell, the breath knocked from her lungs by Patrick's desperate shove. Gunfire continued to echo around the clearing as she scrambled to her knees, disoriented and terrified. Patrick was down, blood spreading across his left shoulder. Edmund was still standing, his rifle trained on the fallen man, preparing for another shot. Without conscious thought, Sophia raised the revolver Patrick had insisted she carry. Her hand was steady as she sighted along the barrel, just as he had taught her. She squeezed the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small clearing. Edmund staggered, a look of profound surprise crossing his features as he dropped his rifle and clutched at his chest. He took one faltering step forward, then collapsed to his knees before pitching forward onto the ground. One of Edmund's companions fired wildly toward the cabin. Then both men turned and fled, abandoning their employer as they raced for their horses. Sophia scrambled to Patrick's side, her heart in her throat as she assessed his wound. The bullet had torn through his shoulder, painful but not immediately life-threatening. His eyes were clear as they met hers. "Edmund," he gasped, trying to sit up despite the pain. Sophia glanced toward the motionless figure lying in the dirt of the clearing. I shot him," she said, the reality of what she had done only now sinking in. Patrick managed to struggle to his feet with her assistance, supporting his injured arm against his body as they cautiously approached Edmund's fallen form. There was no need for caution. He lay face down, unmoving, blood pooling beneath him. "Is he?" Sophia couldn't finish the question. Patrick knelt painfully, checking for signs of life before looking up at her with solemn confirmation. "Yes, your shot was true." A complex wave of emotions washed over Sophia: relief, shock, a strange grief, not for the man Edmund had become but for the promise their marriage had once held, now forever extinguished. "I had to," she whispered, as much to herself as to Patrick. "He would have killed you, killed us both." "You did what was necessary," Patrick affirmed, rising unsteadily to stand beside her. No court in the territory would say different. It was self-defense, pure and simple. The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. Sheriff Johnson, alerted by a passing hunter who had heard the gunfire, arrived within hours. After taking their statements and examining the scene, he confirmed what Patrick had said: Sophia had acted in clear self-defense against a man who had repeatedly threatened her life and violated a legal restraining order. Edmund's body was transported back to Glenwood Springs, where an inquest was held 2 days later. The proceedings were brief, the verdict unanimous: justifiable homicide in self-defense. No charges would be filed against Sophia Sullivan. Patrick's wound, while painful, healed cleanly under the town doctor's care. Within a week, he was able to use his arm again, though full strength would take longer to return. As autumn gave way to early winter, Sophia and Patrick began rebuilding the life that Edmund's violence had interrupted. The divorce proceedings, rendered somewhat moot by Edmund's death, were formally dismissed. Judge Williams issued official documentation confirming the validity of their common-law marriage, removing any lingering legal ambiguities. With the threat finally, permanently removed, they were free to make decisions based on desire rather than necessity. After much discussion, they chose to remain in Glenwood Springs, where Sophia returned to teaching at the now repaired Hartwell Hotel, and Patrick accepted a position managing a local ranch. 6 months after Edmund's death, they stood together in Glenwood Springs' small church, exchanging formal vows before friends and the community that had embraced them. It wasn't legally necessary, but both wanted the ceremony a public affirmation of the commitment they had made to each other under such unusual circumstances. Sophia wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her honey blonde hair adorned with wildflowers. Patrick, resplendent in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such naked adoration that tears pricked her eyes as she walked toward him. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the crowded church, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of two souls who have already proven their devotion through trials few of us can imagine." The words washed over Sophia as she stood beside Patrick, his hand warm and steady around hers. Their journey had been unconventional, their love forged in danger and necessity, before blossoming into something deeper and more enduring. "I, Patrick, take thee, Sophia." His voice was clear and unwavering as he repeated his vows. "To be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Sophia spoke her own vows, memories flashed through her mind: the desperate flight from Edmund's ranch, the chance meeting with Patrick at his campfire, his quiet declaration that a man who beat his wife for not bearing sons never deserved her in the first place. How right he had been, and how much had changed since that night. "You may kiss the bride," the minister pronounced, and Patrick drew her gently into his arms, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. The celebration that followed at the Hartwell Hotel was joyous and unreserved. The entire town seemed to have turned out to wish them well, from Sheriff Johnson and Judge Williams to Mrs. Cooper and Mr. Phillips, from Sophia's pupils and their parents to the ranch hands who worked with Patrick. As night fell and the festivities continued, Patrick led Sophia onto the hotel's veranda for a moment of quiet amid the celebration. "Happy?" he asked softly, echoing the question he had posed on the night of their common-law marriage. Sophia smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Beyond measure," she replied honestly. He drew her close, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed out at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. "I never expected to find you," he murmured against her hair. "Never thought I'd find this kind of happiness after everything." "Nor I," Sophia agreed, understanding completely. Both had carried wounds from their pasts, both had known loss and pain. Finding each other had been an unexpected gift, a second chance neither had been looking for. 2 years later, on a bright spring morning, Sophia Sullivan sat in the garden of their home on the outskirts of Glenwood Springs, watching as Patrick played with their son. Thomas Patrick Sullivan, not yet a year old, giggled as his father lifted him high, his small face alight with joy. The home Patrick had promised to build her stood solid and welcoming behind them, not grand but comfortable. With enough land for the horses he loved and room for the family they were creating together. The school Sophia had dreamed of opening was now a reality. a small building on their property where children from outlying ranches could receive education 3 days each week. As she watched her husband and son, Sophia's hand drifted to her abdomen where a new life was just beginning to make its presence known. She hadn't told Patrick yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news that their family would grow again by winter. Patrick looked up, catching her gaze across the garden. With Thomas settled securely on his hip, he crossed to where she sat, dropping a kiss on her upturned face. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Sullivan? You've got that secretive smile again." Sophia reached up to touch his cheek, marveling still at the journey that had brought them here from fear and violence to this peaceful, joyful life they had built together. "I was thinking," she said softly, "that sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest futures. If I hadn't found the courage to leave Edmund that day, you'd have found it eventually," Patrick said with absolute conviction. "That strength was always in you." Sophia smiled, taking Thomas from his arms and settling the drowsy boy against her shoulder. "Perhaps. But I'm grateful it was you I found that night, you who told me I deserved better." "And I meant every word," Patrick replied, sitting beside her on the garden bench. His arm encircled her shoulders as they watched the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. "He never deserved you. But I promise to spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the gift you've given me." As their son drifted to sleep against her shoulder, and the child within her grew steadily stronger, Sophia leaned into her husband's embrace, perfectly content in the knowledge that she had finally found where she truly belonged. The shadows of the past would always be part of their story, but they no longer defined the path ahead. That path belonged to them alone, Sophia and Patrick Sullivan together, free to write the rest of their story exactly as they chose.